My own family snubbed my wedding, dismissing it as unimportant. But my billionaire in-laws made it the event of the century, leaving everyone who skipped it filled with regret. That night, I sparkled brighter than ever. Can you believe my own parents, the very people who always lectured me about character over cash, told me my wedding was beneath them? They had no idea they were about to miss the most jaw-dropping, headline-grabbing celebration Colorado had ever seen, and witness their own spectacular comeuppance. I remember twisting my engagement ring, my stomach doing somersaults as I stared at my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and then, a gut-wrenching string of texts. Liliana, it read, we simply cannot support this union. Your father and I have invested too much in your future to watch you throw it away on a carpenter from Montana. Until you come to your senses, we won't be attending this so-called wedding. My stomach nodded. I practically dropped my phone on the counter, the sheer audacity of it all. I looked around our tiny Denver apartment, already a battlefield of wedding chaos. Mason was pulling double shifts at construction sites downtown. I was juggling extra assignments at 3 different schools. We'd scrimped and saved for months, just for a modest church rental and a reception at the community center. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. My parents, Dr. Patricia Jones and attorney Richard Jones, constantly droned on about character over wealth. Yet here they were, dismissing Mason, the kindest, hardest-working man I knew, because he didn't have a trust fund or a fancy degree. Mason walked in then, boots heavy with sawdust and concrete dust, his dark hair wild. But his green eyes, always so quick to find mine, instantly filled with concern. What's wrong, Ella? He murmured, stepping closer. I just handed him my phone, silent. He read the texts, his jaw tightening with each line. I'm sorry, he whispered, pulling me into a hug, tucking my head under his chin. I know how much you wanted them there. My voice cracked. It's not your fault. They're snobs, but I just never imagined getting married without my parents. Mom was supposed to help with my dress. Dad was supposed to walk me down the aisle. Mason pulled back, cupping my face with his calloused hands. We don't need their approval, Ella. We never did. And honestly? My family, they're going to love you so much, you'll forget all about them. I managed a weak smile. Truth be told, I hadn't met most of Mason's family yet. They lived remotely in Montana, always traveling. His dad, Robert Carter, had some kind of business, and his mom, Susan, was excited to finally meet me. They'd confirmed they'd fly in for the wedding with his sister, Emma, and several cousins. Tell me again about your family, I asked, settling into his arms on our thrift store couch, feeling a nervous flutter about meeting them all at once. Mason chuckled, that low rumble I loved. Nothing to be nervous about. Dad's quiet, but incredibly kind. He'll probably try to fix something in your apartment within 5 minutes. Mom will want to cook for you and ask a million questions about your students. Emma will steal you for book talk, she's getting her PhD in literature. He swore they trusted his judgment. Plus, he whispered, pressing a kiss to my head, I've told them enough about you that they feel like they already know you. Mom actually said she's never heard me talk about anyone the way I talk about you. The wedding was weeks away, and the DIY stress was real. We'd booked a sweet little white church on the outskirts of Denver, with white wooden pews and stained glass windows. The reception was just next door at the community center. Barbecue from Mason's favorite local restaurant. A modest grocery store cake. It was simple, heartfelt, perfectly us. Mason built our arch from reclaimed wood. I made the wildflower centerpieces. Everything was exactly what we wanted. But the guest list had shrunk painfully. My parents' absence meant my entire side of the church would be almost empty, just a few college friends and my sweet, elderly Aunt Margaret. The thought of walking down that aisle, seeing mostly empty pews, made my chest ache. Maybe we should postpone, I whispered, despair creeping in. Save more money. Try to fix things with my parents. Mason's voice was firm. Ella, look at me. I met his gaze. We are not postponing our lives for people who can't see how incredible you are. Our wedding will be perfect because we'll be there, promising to love each other forever. That's all that matters. He was right, but it didn't dull the sting. I'd dreamed of this day since I was little, and in every version, my parents were beaming. Instead, they were probably at their country club, gossiping about my unfortunate life choices. I threw myself into preparations. If my parents wanted to miss the happiest day of my life, that was their loss. I altered my grandmother's vintage lace dress, practiced my vows until I could recite them without crying. Mason's family arrived 2 days before, and I was genuinely shocked by how normal they were. Robert, Mason's dad, was a kind, broad-shouldered man, an older version of Mason with hands that had clearly seen hard work. Susan, his mom, petite and energetic, hugged me like we were old friends. Finally, she beamed. Mason has told us so much about you. I feel like we're old friends already. Emma, his sister, was a curly-haired bookworm who immediately grilled me on my favorite authors and her current dissertation topic. They rented modest hotel rooms downtown, took us to a casual Italian place for dinner. Nothing suggested anything other than a regular, middle-class family from rural Montana. Robert talked about the weather. Susan asked if I needed help with anything. Emma told hilarious childhood stories about Mason. The only oddity? I'd assumed they drove from Montana, but Mason mentioned they flew in. When I asked, he just shrugged. Dad found a good deal. The night before, I lay awake, nervous but excited. Tomorrow, I'd become Mrs. Liliana Carter. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. Congratulations on your wedding tomorrow. We're so looking forward to celebrating with you. The Carter family. I smiled in the darkness. At least someone would be there to witness our vows. Little did I know, by tomorrow night, I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about the quiet carpenter I was about to marry. Wedding morning dawned bright with Colorado's signature brilliant blue sky. My maid of honor, Sarah, was already buzzing around my childhood friend's guest room. Today's the day, Mrs. Carter, she sang. How are you feeling? Terrified, excited, and nauseous, I admitted, pulling the covers over my head. Is that normal? Completely normal, she laughed, yanking me out of bed. Now get up. Your hair appointment is in an hour. At the salon, as the stylist worked on my long brown hair, coaxing it into soft vintage waves, my phone rang. Aunt Margaret. My heart jumped. Margaret, are you okay? Her voice was shaky. Oh, honey. I fell. Broke my hip. I'm at Denver General. They're taking me to surgery in an hour. My blood ran cold. Aunt Margaret was my only family member, the one who was supposed to walk me down the aisle. Don't worry about the wedding, she insisted quickly. You go ahead and have your beautiful day. I'll be thinking of you. Margaret, I should come to the hospital. Absolutely not. You have a wedding to attend, young lady. Your own wedding. Promise me you won't leave that church. After I hung up, Sarah hugged me tight, careful not to mess up my hair. I'm so sorry, Ella, but she's right. You can visit her tomorrow on your honeymoon layover. Tears blurred my vision. Now I really am walking down the aisle alone. No family at all. Sarah's grip tightened. You have me. And you have Mason's family. Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. An hour later, we pulled up to the little white church. It looked even more beautiful than I remembered. Mason's handmade wooden arch framed by our wildflowers. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. But the parking lot, it was packed. Not with our humble cars, but with luxury vehicles. A sleek black Mercedes. A pristine white BMW SUV. A silver Porsche. What looked like a Tesla. My stomach plummeted. Had my parents shown up, bringing their snobby friends as a power play? Those aren't your parents' cars, are they? Sarah asked, voicing my exact thought. No way, I muttered. We snuck in a side entrance, and I heard it. A hum of voices. A lot of voices. The church was full. Sarah peeked around the corner, her eyes wide. Ella, you need to see this. I looked. My jaw dropped. The church was packed. Every single pew was filled with people I'd never seen. All dressed impeccably. Designer dresses, sparkling jewelry, expensive suits. An electric energy filled the air, so different from what I'd expected for our simple ceremony. Who are all these people? I whispered. Before Sarah could answer, Susan Carter appeared at my elbow, radiating elegance in a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Liliana, you look absolutely stunning, she exclaimed, hugging me carefully. That dress is exquisite. Susan, I don't understand. Who are all these people? We only invited about 30 guests. Her smile turned slightly mysterious. Well, dear, when word got out about Mason's wedding, a few more people expressed interest. Family, friends, Robert's business associates. A few more? I stared at the packed sanctuary. There must be over 200 people in there. Closer to 300, actually, Susan chirped. My head spun. Business associates? What kind of business did Robert Carter run that warranted 300 wedding guests in our tiny church? Then Emma appeared. The photographer wants to take some pictures with you before the ceremony starts. Photographer? I blinked. We hired Mrs. Peterson with her digital camera from down the street. Emma just smiled. Oh, that's so sweet. But Dad arranged for someone a bit more professional. She led me to a small room with professional lighting equipment. Miss Jones, I'm Marcus Wellington from Wellington Photography, a man in an expensive suit said, extending his hand. We're honored to be documenting your special day. Wellington Photography? They shot the governor's daughter's wedding. I think there's been a mistake, I stammered. But Susan's gentle hand on my arm stopped me. No mistake, dear. Robert and I just wanted to make sure this day was captured beautifully. The next half hour was a blur of professional posing. I kept catching glimpses of the sanctuary filling up even more. When Sarah returned from checking on the reception, her face was ghost white. Ella, she whispered, I went to check on the community center and it's not the community center anymore. What do you mean? I mean, there are luxury catering trucks outside, florists, what looks like a full bar setup, and party planners with clipboards directing people around like they're setting up for a gala. My heart hammered. That's impossible. We booked the community center, barbecue from Jimmy's, grocery store cake. Sarah just said, I think Mason's family might have made some changes. Before I could even compute, the church organist started playing. Not our simple hymn, but something grand, rich, and complex, cathedral-worthy. Susan appeared with my bouquet. It wasn't the modest daisies and baby's breath I'd ordered. It was a stunning cascade of white roses, peonies, and orchids that likely cost more than our entire original wedding budget. Susan, I pleaded, I don't understand what's happening. She held my hands, and I noticed for the first time the massive diamond on her finger. Not the simple gold band she'd worn at dinner, but a rock the size of a grape. Sweetheart, she said gently, there are some things about our family that Mason wanted to tell you himself. But what's important right now is that you're about to marry the man you love, and he's waiting for you at that altar with the biggest smile I've ever seen. The music swelled. I heard the congregation rising to their feet. 300 strangers were waiting to watch me walk down the aisle. Sarah squeezed my hand. Whatever's happening, Ella, Mason loves you. That part hasn't changed. I took a shaky breath, clutched the extravagant orchid bouquet, and prepared to walk toward the biggest surprise of my life. The sanctuary doors opened, and I stepped into what felt like a completely different universe. The little white church I'd fallen in love with was gone, transformed into something out of a fairy tale. White silk draped every surface. Thousands of white roses and baby's breath created stunning arrangements at the end of each pew. Professional lighting cast everything in a warm, golden glow. But it was the sea of faces that truly stole my breath. Every single person in that packed church turned to look at me, and I recognized exactly none of them. These weren't the casual friends and extended family I'd expected. These were people straight out of high society galas, faces from Forbes magazine. Designer dresses, blinding jewelry. I knew none of them. And there, at the front of the church, stood Mason. Even from the back of the aisle, I could see his face light up when he saw me. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo I'd never seen, probably worth more than my car. His best man, who I'd expected to be his college roommate, Jake, was instead a sophisticated man in his 40s wearing what looked like a Rolex. But Mason's smile, that genuine, bright expression that had made me fall in love with him in the first place, that was the same. It was my anchor in this bizarre, gilded reality. As I walked down the aisle, my grandmother's vintage dress suddenly felt ridiculously humble. I caught snippets of whispered conversations. "She's lovely. Robert must be so pleased. I heard she's a teacher. How refreshing. The Carter family always knows how to throw an event." Carter family events, what did that even mean? Halfway down, my breath hitched. Governor Patricia Rice was sitting in the third row, smiling warmly. The actual governor of Colorado. Next to her, the mayor of Denver. Behind them, a woman I was pretty sure I'd seen on the cover of Colorado Business Weekly. My legs went wobbly. Mason's eyes never left mine. When I finally reached the altar, he stepped forward and took my hand, his familiar touch grounding me in the midst of all this surreal luxury. "You look incredible," he whispered. For a second, everything else vanished. The officiant began the ceremony. I tried to focus on the words, on the vows we'd written, on the promises we were making. But my mind kept wandering. How did a carpenter from Montana know the governor of Colorado? As Mason spoke his vows, his voice steady and clear, promising to love me through whatever surprises life might bring, I saw a knowing glint in his eyes. He knew exactly what surprises were coming. My own vows felt surreal, speaking them to this packed audience of strangers. But when I looked into Mason's face, the words came from my heart, just as they had when we'd practiced alone. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant declared, and Mason's lips met mine as 300 people erupted in applause. The photographers' cameras flashed continuously. This moment was being documented like a state event. As we walked back down the aisle, now husband and wife, I caught sight of something that made my heart stop. In the very back pew, looking utterly out of place but undeniably present, my parents. Dad in his best suit, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mom taking photos through tears. They came. Somehow, despite everything they'd said, they were here. "Mason," I whispered as we reached the back of the church. "My parents are here." He followed my gaze, and his expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. "I know," he said quietly. "I'll explain everything at the reception." Before I could ask what he meant, we were swept outside by the photographer for more pictures. The parking lot was transformed, too. A red carpet led from the church steps to a line of luxury cars. Rose petals covered the ground. "Mrs. Carter!" Marcus the photographer called out. "We'd like to get some shots by the Bentley." I looked around, confused, until I realized he was talking to me. Mrs. Carter. That was my name now. And apparently, there was a Bentley involved in our wedding photos. The car was a pristine white Bentley Continental adorned with white ribbons and more of those expensive roses. Mason helped me pose next to it, his hand warm on the small of my back, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders. "Whose car is this?" I whispered. "It's yours now," he said simply. "Wedding gift from my parents." "A Bentley?" "Carpenter's parents don't give Bentleys as wedding gifts." After what felt like hundreds more photos, a man in a chauffeur's uniform ushered us into the backseat of the luxury car. He addressed Mason as Mr. Carter, with a level of formality that suggested this wasn't their first meeting. As we drove the short distance to what should have been the community center, I stared out the window in shock. The parking lot was filled with more luxury vehicles and professional valets. A red carpet led to an entrance that had been completely transformed, dripping with thousands of dollars of flowers and lighting. "Mason," I breathed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is happening?" He took my hands, conflict etched on his face. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Something I wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure how." "What kind of something?" He took a deep breath. "My family? We're not exactly who you think we are." Our door opened. A full orchestra swelled from the transformed community center. Through the glass doors, crystal chandeliers gleamed over a ballroom. "How?" "Not exactly?" I managed to ask. Mason helped me out of the car. As we stood on the red carpet with photographers capturing our every move, he looked into my eyes with an expression that was part love, part apology, and part something that might have been relief. "My father isn't just in business, Ella. He owns Carter Industries." Forbes estimated our family's net worth at around $3 billion last year. The world tilted sideways. $3 billion, my husband. My carpenter husband, the one who fretted over overtime shifts and clipped coupons, was a billionaire? "That's impossible," I whispered. "I know it sounds crazy. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I loved that you fell in love with me, not my bank account. I loved that you didn't care about money or status or any of that. You just loved me." Before I could even respond, the doors to the reception venue opened, and a wave of classical music washed over us. Inside, our 300 wedding guests mingled in the most elegant event space I'd ever seen. And standing at the entrance, beaming with pride, were Robert and Susan Carter, apparently two of the wealthiest people in America, waiting to welcome their new daughter-in-law to a world I never knew existed. Walking into that reception felt like stepping through a portal into another dimension. The community center I'd visited just days ago was gone, gutted, rebuilt into something that belonged in a luxury hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling that had somehow been raised and draped in flowing white silk. The concrete floors were now covered in gleaming hardwood, and floor-to-ceiling windows had been installed where blank walls used to be, offering stunning views of the Rocky Mountains. Round tables for 10, draped in ivory linens, were topped with towering centerpieces of white orchids, roses, and peonies. The silverware looked like actual silver, and the wine glasses were crystal that caught the light like diamonds. A full orchestra was set up on a proper stage, playing classical music that made our original playlist of country songs seem laughably inadequate. This wasn't a reception for 50 people eating barbecue off paper plates. This was a black tie gala for 300 who were now applauding our entrance. Professional servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than I made in a week. Jennifer Walsh, our event coordinator, glided up, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Carter, everything's proceeding perfectly on schedule. Cocktail hour will continue for another 30 minutes, then we'll transition to dinner. The menu has been tailored to your preferences, as discussed." I stared at her blankly. I hadn't discussed any menu. Her smile didn't falter. "Of course, the preferences your mother-in-law shared with us. She mentioned your love for Mediterranean cuisine and a weakness for chocolate desserts." Mason squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Jennifer. Everything looks incredible." As Jennifer walked away, I turned to Mason with what I'm sure was a wild look in my eyes. "How long has this been planned? The orchestra, the flowers, everything?" "Ella, I can explain. A booming voice interrupted. I turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit approaching. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, congratulations. What a beautiful ceremony. Mason straightened slightly. Senator Williams, thank you for coming. Ella, this is Senator David Williams. United States Senator Williams. My hand shook his automatically, my brain reeling. A U.S. Senator at my wedding? He gushed about the Carters' invaluable contributions to Colorado's economic development, then said, "And I hear you're a teacher? How wonderful. Education is the foundation of everything." Soon I was in a receiving line, shaking hands with people whose names I'd only seen in Forbes magazine and on the news, the CEO of a major tech company, a federal judge, the owner of the Colorado Rockies. All treated Mason with the familiarity of old friends, and me with the kind of respect usually reserved for billionaires' wives. I need some air, I whispered to Mason after the 10th introduction to someone whose net worth probably exceeded most countries' GDP. My head was spinning. He immediately guided me toward a set of French doors that opened onto what had once been the community center's tiny back patio, but was now an elegant outdoor terrace, complete with heat lamps, more flowers, and a mountain view somehow enhanced with professional lighting. How is this possible? I demanded once we were alone. Yesterday, this was a community center with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting. Mason ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling for the first time all day. My mother has a team of people who specialize in event transformation. When she sets her mind to something, it happens fast. A team of people? I repeated slowly. Mason, normal mothers don't have teams of people. I know. He sat down on a bench that was definitely more expensive than our entire apartment's furniture combined. Ella, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this for months. I sank beside him, my grandmother's dress pooling around us. Tell me what, exactly? That you're rich? That your family is rich? That you've been lying to me about who you are? Not lying, he said quickly. Never lying. Everything I told you about myself is true. I did grow up in Montana. I do love working with my hands. I really was living paycheck to paycheck when we met. Then how? Because I chose to. He turned to face me fully. When I turned 18, my father offered me a position at Carter Industries. Vice President Track, corner office, 7-figure salary. I blinked at him. You turned down a 7-figure salary? I wanted to make my own way. I wanted to know who I was outside of the family money. So, I moved to Denver, got a job in construction, and tried to live like a normal person. A normal person? I echoed, my voice rising. Mason, we split grocery bills. I watched you stress about overtime pay. You let me believe we were struggling financially. We were, he said earnestly. I was. I've been living entirely off my construction salary for the past 3 years. I haven't touched a penny of family money. But they've been watching, I said, the pieces clicking together. Your parents knew exactly who I was, where I worked, what I liked to eat. Mason nodded reluctantly. They had you investigated before I brought you to meet them. It's standard protocol for anyone who gets close to family members. I'm sorry, Ella. I hated that part of it. Investigated. The word was bile in my mouth. What did they find out about me that I don't know about myself? Nothing bad, he said quickly. Just basic background stuff, financial records, employment history, education. They were actually impressed that you've never had so much as a parking ticket. I stood up abruptly, needing to pace. This is insane, Mason. People don't get investigated for dating construction workers. People don't transform community centers overnight. People don't invite U.S. senators to their weddings. The Carters do, he said quietly. Through the French doors, I could see our wedding guests mingling, laughing, drinking champagne. My parents were standing near the orchestra, looking simultaneously awed and terrified. My mother was actually taking notes in a small notebook, no doubt documenting every detail for her country club friends. "Your parents came," Mason said, following my gaze. "How did they even know to come?" "They said they weren't coming. They were very clear about not supporting this marriage." Mason's silence was my answer. "You called them," I said. "Or your family did." "My father called your father yesterday morning. They had a conversation about the importance of family being present for life's most significant moments." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind that happens when Robert Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Industries, personally calls to invite you to his son's wedding." I leaned against the railing, staring out at the mountain view. "So, they didn't have a change of heart about you being good enough for me. They just found out you were rich." My voice was flat. "Well, that's exactly what happened, isn't it?" My parents, who refused to attend their daughter's wedding because her fiancé was just a carpenter, suddenly showed up the moment they discovered he was actually a billionaire. Mason moved to stand beside me. "Does it matter why they came?" "They're here now." "It matters," I said, my voice breaking slightly, because it proves everything I already knew about them. "They don't love me. They love the idea of what I can do for their social status." Inside, Jennifer, the event coordinator, was announcing that dinner would be served in 10 minutes. Through the glass, I could see our guests moving toward their assigned tables, each marked with calligraphy place cards that probably cost more than our original wedding invitations. "What happens now?" I asked. "Do I go back in there and pretend I belong in a room full of senators and CEOs? Do I smile and make small talk with people whose weekly grocery budget is more than I make in a year?" Mason tipped my hands in his. "You don't have to pretend anything. You belong in that room because you're my wife. Because you're brilliant and kind. And you make me want to be a better person every single day. But I'm not one of them, Mason. I grade papers at the kitchen table and shop at thrift stores and drive a car with duct tape holding the bumper on." "Neither am I," he said firmly. "Money doesn't change you inside, Ella. I'm still the same guy who fell in love with you in that coffee shop. I still want to build things with my hands and come home to you every night." The orchestra began playing what sounded like a dinner chime, and I could see guests taking their seats at tables that probably cost more to set than most people's wedding budgets. My stomach dropped. Our first dance was supposed to be "Too Amazed by You" played from someone's iPhone playlist. Instead, I was being guided onto a proper dance floor while a full orchestra prepared to provide the soundtrack to what felt like the most watched moment of my life. It was an instrumental version of the song we'd chosen. Somehow, they'd known. As we swayed together under the crystal chandeliers, with 300 pairs of eyes watching our every move, I finally felt a moment of peace. "I'm still me," Mason whispered in my ear. "And you're still you. That's all that matters." "Is it, though?" I whispered back. "Because I'm pretty sure me doesn't know how to be married to a billionaire." "Good thing I don't know how to be a billionaire husband either," he said with a smile. "We'll figure it out together." When the song ended, applause filled the room, and I realized that dozens of phones had been capturing our dance. Tomorrow, photos of our wedding would probably be all over social media and society pages I'd never heard of. As other couples joined us on the dance floor, I spotted my parents approaching from across the room. My mother was practically glowing with excitement, while my father looked like he was still processing everything he'd witnessed. "Aliliana, sweetheart," my mother gushed as they reached us. "This is absolutely incredible. The flowers alone must have cost more than most people's entire weddings." There it was. Not "I'm sorry we almost missed your special day," or "we're proud of you." Just an immediate focus on the money. "Mom, Dad," I said carefully, "I'm glad you decided to come." My father cleared his throat awkwardly. When Mr. Carter called yesterday, he made it clear that family should be present for such an important occasion. He's quite persuasive. Persuasive how? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Well, my mother jumped in, her voice dropping to an excited whisper. He mentioned that Carter Industries is looking to expand their healthcare investments, and your father's expertise in medical technology could be quite valuable. My heart sank. Even now, at my own wedding, my parents were networking. Did you know about this? I asked Mason, who was standing beside me with a carefully neutral expression. My father called them, he admitted, but I didn't know about any business discussions. Before I could respond, the orchestra announced that it was time for the father-daughter dance. My father stepped forward expectantly, a proud smile on his face. But I hesitated. This was the man who'd refused to walk me down the aisle just hours ago, now ready to dance with me because he discovered I'd married into money. I don't think so, I said quietly. My father's face fell. Liliana, I know we made some mistakes, but… Some mistakes? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice anymore. You told me you couldn't support my marriage. You said Mason was beneath our family. You made it clear that you'd rather miss my wedding than pretend to approve of my choices. We were protecting you, my mother said defensively. We thought he was just some construction worker with no prospects. He was just some construction worker. I shot back. And I loved him anyway. But you couldn't see past his bank account to the person he actually is. The entire reception seemed to quiet around us, though the orchestra continued playing softly. I was vaguely aware that many of our guests were watching the drama unfold, but I was beyond caring. The only reason you're here right now is because you found out he's rich, I continued. If he really was just a carpenter, you'd be at home right now telling your friends about your daughter's unfortunate life choices. That's not fair, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I looked around the opulent reception, at the hundreds of guests who belonged to a world I'd never known existed. Tell me honestly, Dad, if this was the same community center reception we originally planned, if Mason really was just making construction wages, would you be here? The silence that followed was answer enough. Robert Carter appeared beside us, his presence immediately commanding attention. Dr. Jones, Mrs. Jones, he said politely. Perhaps we could continue this conversation at a more appropriate time. This is, after all, a celebration. My parents nodded quickly, clearly intimidated by Mason's father's quiet authority. They melted back into the crowd, leaving me standing in the middle of the dance floor, feeling like I just had my heart broken all over again. I'm sorry, Mason said softly. I thought if they came, if they saw how much I love you. They didn't come for love, I cut him off, watching my parents across the room as they introduced themselves to other wealthy guests. They came for networking opportunities. Emma Carter appeared at my elbow, elegant and warm. Want to get some fresh air? There's something I think you should see. She led me back outside to the terrace where the mountain view was now illuminated by professional lighting that made the peaks look magical against the night sky. On a small table sat a laptop computer, its screen glowing softly. What's this? I asked. Social media, Emma said with a grin. Your wedding is trending. I stared at the screen in shock. #Mason Carter Wedding was indeed trending on multiple platforms, with hundreds of posts from guests sharing photos and videos of the ceremony and reception. But what surprised me wasn't the social media attention. It was the comments, most beautiful bride ever. #goals. This is what true love looks like. She seems so down to earth and sweet. Lucky girl, but he's lucky, too. Look how happy they are together. Real love story. You can see it in their eyes. Emma, I said slowly. These people don't even know me. No, she said with a smile. But they can see what we all see. That you and Mason are perfect for each other. Money or no money. As I scrolled through hundreds of positive comments from strangers who had watched our story unfold online, a profound realization washed over me. My parents' approval had never really mattered. What mattered was the life Mason and I were going to build together, and this new family that had welcomed me with open arms from the very beginning. The orchestra began playing again. And through the French doors, I could see Mason searching the crowd for me, his face lighting up when he spotted me on the terrace. For the first time since walking into that transformed church, I felt truly ready. Ready to embrace whatever came next. Walking back into the reception, I felt different, lighter somehow, as if confronting my parents had lifted a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Mason immediately appeared at my side, his relief visible when he saw my face. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I said, and meant it. The evening continued to unfold like something out of a dream. The cake-cutting ceremony involved a 4-tier masterpiece that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than being eaten. Each layer was a different flavor. It was so far removed from our original grocery store sheet cake that I couldn't help but laugh. "What's funny?" Mason asked as we posed for photos with the ornate cake. "I'm just thinking about how we spent 3 weeks debating whether we could afford the upgrade from vanilla to chocolate," I said. "And now we have 4 different flavors, each probably costing more than our entire original budget." "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. "The simple version we planned?" I considered this as the photographer directed us to cut the first slice. "I miss the innocence of it," I admitted. "But I don't miss feeling like we had to choose between things we wanted because of money." As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations that would have terrified me just hours earlier. Senator Williams, it turned out, was a former teacher who was passionate about education reform. We spent 20 minutes discussing literacy programs and standardized testing while our husbands talked about infrastructure bills. "You know," Margaret said, sipping her champagne, "the Carter Education Foundation is always looking for passionate educators to help guide their programs. You should consider getting involved." Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught my attention. A young woman in an evening gown was arguing with what appeared to be security personnel. "I'm family," she was saying loudly. "Ask Mason. He'll tell you I'm supposed to be here." Mason's expression darkened immediately. "Excuse me," he said to the group we'd been talking with and headed toward the disturbance. I followed, curious and concerned. The woman was probably in her mid-20s, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. She was beautiful in an expensive, high-maintenance way that made me suddenly conscious of my grandmother's vintage dress. "Clarissa," Mason said as we approached, his voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" "Congratulating you, of course," she said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though, I have to say, I'm surprised you didn't invite me personally." I looked between them, sensing an undercurrent I didn't understand. "Clarissa Worthington," the woman said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "And you must be the lucky bride. I'm an old friend of Mason's." "A very old friend." The way she emphasized very made my stomach tighten. But before I could respond, Robert Carter appeared beside us with the kind of expression that suggested this conversation was about to end quickly. "Miss Worthington," he said coolly, "I don't believe you are on our guest list." "Oh, come now, Mr. Carter," Clarissa said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Surely there's room for one more guest at such a lavish affair." "Security will escort you out," Robert said simply, then turned to Mason and me. "I apologize for the ex-girlfriend," he said briefly. "From before I moved to Denver. It's been over for years." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. But before I could ask, the orchestra began playing the last dance of the evening. Mason took my hand and led me onto the dance floor one final time as our guests gathered around us. The crystal chandeliers cast everything in a warm glow. The mountain views through the windows were breathtaking. We were surrounded by people who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. My parents stood at the edge of the crowd, looking somewhat lost, but trying to fit in. Emma was dancing with someone who might have been a tech billionaire, laughing at something he'd said. Robert and Susan Carter watched their son with obvious pride and affection. "Any regrets?" Mason asked as we swayed. "Just one," I said finally. Mason's face fell. "What?" "I regret not knowing about your family sooner," I clarified. "Not because of the money, but because I missed out on months of knowing how wonderful they are." His relief was palpable. "They've been dying to properly welcome you to the family," he chuckled. "Mom's already planning Christmas, and she wants to know if you'd be interested in joining the Foundation's board of directors, the Education Foundation, among others. Carter Industries supports about 15 different charitable organizations. Mom thinks you'd be perfect for the education and children's welfare boards." The idea of having the resources to actually make a difference in children's lives was both thrilling and overwhelming. "Mason, I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know about teaching kids and making their lives better," he said. "That's more important than knowing how to read financial reports." As the song ended, Robert Carter stepped onto the stage and took the microphone from the orchestra conductor. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried easily across the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Mason and Aliliana's wedding. As many of you know, family is everything to Susan and me. Tonight, we're not just celebrating a marriage. We're welcoming a remarkable young woman into our family." He looked directly at me, and I felt tears starting to form. "You've made our son happier than we've ever seen him. Your dedication to education, your kindness, and your genuine heart represent everything we value most. We're honored to call you our daughter." The applause was thunderous, and I realized right then that this feeling, this profound acceptance and being valued for who I was what I'd been missing from my relationship with my own parents my entire life. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself saying goodbye to people whose names I would never have imagined knowing. The governor hugged me and invited Mason and me to dinner at the state capitol. The tech CEO handed me his card and said his company was always looking for innovative education consultants. 3 different foundation directors asked if I'd be interested in joining their boards. My parents approached us as we were preparing to leave for our honeymoon suite at the Four Seasons downtown. "Aliliana," my mother said hesitantly. "We want you to know that we're proud of you." "Are you?" I challenged. "Or are you proud of who I married?" My father stepped forward. "We made mistakes today, big ones. We let our prejudices cloud our judgment about Mason. And more importantly, we failed to support you when you needed us most." "You did," I agreed. "Can you forgive us?" my mother asked, tears in her eyes. I looked at these people who had raised me but never really seen me, who had come to my wedding for all the wrong reasons, but were at least trying to admit their mistakes. "I can forgive you," I said finally. "But things are going to be different between us from now on." "Different how?" my father asked. "You're going to have to earn back my trust," I said. "And you're going to have to accept that my life is my own, regardless of how much money my husband has." They nodded, looking chastened. And I realized that this was probably the first real adult conversation we'd ever had. Mason and I finally left the reception at nearly midnight, climbing into the white Bentley that was apparently now ours. As we drove through the quiet Denver streets toward the hotel, I reflected on the most surreal day of my life. "So," I said, leaning against Mason's shoulder. "What happens now? Do I have to learn how to be rich?" "You have to learn how to be happy," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Everything else is just details." Looking out at the city lights, I realized that for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. Not because of money or status, but because I'd found a family that valued me for exactly who I was. Tomorrow, I'd wake up as Mrs. Aliliana Carter, wife of a billionaire, potential board member of multiple foundations, and daughter-in-law to 2 of the most powerful people in Colorado. But tonight, I was just a woman who had married the love of her life, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her happiness. And that felt like the greatest fortune of all. 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Carter Industries, looking out at the Denver skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view I never could have imagined having access to. The quarterly Education Foundation meeting had just concluded, and I was reviewing the proposals we'd approved for funding: 12 new literacy programs across Colorado, 3 STEM initiatives for underserved schools, and a teacher training program that would impact over 500 educators. Mrs. Carter, Jennifer Walsh, the same woman who had coordinated our wedding, now served as the Foundation's program director. The scholarship recipients are here for the awards ceremony. I smoothed my navy blue designer dress, still felt strange about the price tags, and headed toward the conference room where 20 high school seniors waited with their families. These students would receive full college scholarships funded by the Carter Education Foundation. And seeing their faces when we announced their awards never got old. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said as I entered the room. "Congratulations to all of our scholarship recipients. Your hard work and dedication have brought you here today." As I handed out the scholarship certificates, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that surreal wedding day. The transition hadn't been seamless. Learning to navigate charity galas, board meetings, and the social expectations that came with being a Carter had required more adjustment than I'd anticipated. But the work itself, being able to make a real difference in children's education with resources I'd never dreamed of having, made every awkward moment worthwhile. One of the scholarship recipients, a young girl named Maria Gonzalez from East Denver, reminded me so much of my former students that I lingered to talk with her after the ceremony. "Mrs. Carter," she said shyly, "I wanted to thank you personally. This scholarship means I can become a teacher. I've always dreamed." "What grade do you want to teach?" I asked. "Elementary. I want to work with kids who don't have much support at home, like I did. I want to be the teacher who believes in them." I felt tears pricking my eyes. "That's exactly why we do this, Maria. Teachers like you can change the world, one student at a time." After the ceremony, I drove home to the house that still sometimes felt like I was living in someone else's life. Mason and I had moved out of our tiny Denver apartment into a sprawling estate in Cherry Hills Village, complete with mountain views, a home office for my foundation work, and a workshop where Mason could pursue his carpentry projects. He'd officially joined Carter Industries 6 months ago, but insisted on maintaining his hands-on approach to construction projects. I found him in the kitchen, still wearing his work clothes and covered in sawdust, preparing dinner with the kind of focus he brought to everything he did. "How was the scholarship ceremony?" he asked, wrapping me in a hug despite being dusty. "Perfect. We have 20 kids who are going to college who might not have had the chance otherwise." I pulled back to look at him. "How was your day? Still enjoying the corporate world?" Mason laughed. "I spent the morning in board meetings discussing sustainable building materials and the afternoon actually installing solar panels on a low-income housing project. It's the best of both worlds." As we cooked together, my phone buzzed with a text message. The contact name made me pause. "Mom. The strangest thing happened today," the message read. "I met a woman at the country club whose daughter received one of your foundation scholarships. She couldn't stop talking about how much the program meant to their family. I wanted you to know that your father and I are proud of the work you're doing." I showed the message to Mason, who read it with raised eyebrows. "That's progress," he said carefully. "It is," I agreed. "Slow progress, but progress." My relationship with my parents had indeed been slowly rebuilding over the past 6 months. They'd made genuine efforts to get to know Mason for who he was, rather than what he represented financially. My father had even started volunteering at a college in the classrooms he learned about through Carter Industries' healthcare initiatives. "Speaking of your parents," Mason said, "they're coming to dinner on Sunday, remember? Along with your parents, Emma, and probably half the Colorado political establishment." I said with a laugh. Sunday dinners at the Carter house have become quite the affair. It was true. What had started as simple family dinners had evolved into weekly gatherings that somehow always included interesting guests. Last week, we had dinner with the mayor of Denver and a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who was consulting on one of Robert's renewable energy projects. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Emma's name. Alilyana. Emma's voice was excited. Have you seen the news? What news? Check Channel 7. They're doing a feature on the Carter Education Foundation's impact and you're the main interview. I grabbed the remote and turned on the television, finding the local news station. Sure enough, there was footage from today's scholarship ceremony, followed by an interview I'd given last week about the foundation's programs. The Carter Education Foundation has funded over 50 programs in its first year under new leadership, the reporter was saying. Director Alilyana Carter, a former elementary school teacher, has brought a grassroots approach to the foundation that's already showing remarkable results. The interview segment showed me talking about the importance of supporting both students and teachers, with statistics about improved literacy rates and college enrollment in the schools we'd supported. Mrs. Carter represents a new generation of philanthropic leadership, the reporter continued. Her background in education has helped the foundation focus on programs that create lasting change rather than just providing funding. Mason wrapped his arms around me from behind as we watched. Look at you, changing the world. We're changing the world, I corrected. None of this would be possible without Carter industry support. The news segment ended with footage of our wedding day. Apparently, that event was still considered newsworthy 6 months later. Seeing ourselves dancing at that incredible reception, surrounded by all those influential guests, felt like watching someone else's life. Do you ever miss it? Mason asked quietly. The simplicity of before? I turned in his arms to face him. I miss some things. I miss the feeling that our problems could be solved with overtime pay and coupon clipping. I miss feeling like I knew exactly who I was and where I fit in the world. But I don't miss feeling powerless to help the kids who needed more than I could give them on a teacher's salary. I don't miss watching talented students give up on college because they couldn't afford it. I don't miss feeling like the problems I cared about were too big for me to make a real difference. We were interrupted by the doorbell, which in our new house played an elaborate chime that still made me jump. Mason went to answer it, returning with a massive flower arrangement and an envelope. Delivery for Mrs. Carter, he said with a grin. The flowers were from the family of one of our scholarship recipients, with a note thanking me for making dreams possible. The envelope contained an invitation to speak at the National Education Foundation's annual conference in Washington, D.C. They want you to give the keynote address on innovative philanthropy and education, Mason said, reading over my shoulder. That's terrifying, I said immediately. That's amazing, he countered. Ella, you've become one of the most respected voices in education philanthropy in less than a year. As if to prove his point, my phone rang again. This time, it was a producer from a national morning show wanting to interview me about the scholarship program for a segment on education funding. After I hung up, Mason and I looked at each other and started laughing. Remember when your biggest worry was whether we could afford flowers for the wedding, he said. Remember when you were afraid to tell me your family had money because you thought I might love you for the wrong reasons? I countered. We finished preparing dinner in comfortable silence, and as we sat down to eat, I realized that this quiet moment with my husband in our kitchen, talking about work that mattered and planning for a future that could impact thousands of lives, was exactly the life I was meant to have. My phone buzzed one more time with a text from Roberto Gonzalez, Maria's father. Thank you for seeing her potential when others didn't. You've changed our entire family's future. I showed the message to Mason, who smiled, that same bright smile that had made me fall in love with him in a coffee shop that felt like a lifetime ago. So, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Any regrets about marrying a billionaire? Just one, I said, enjoying the moment of worry that crossed his face. What's that? I regret that it took a wedding disaster to show me that sometimes the most beautiful life comes from the most unexpected places. Outside our windows, the Colorado mountains stood silhouetted against the sunset. And I thought about the girl who had walked down the aisle 6 months ago, afraid her family wouldn't show up to her wedding. That girl had no idea she was walking toward a life beyond her wildest dreams. Not because of money, but because she was about to discover what it meant to be truly valued, truly supported, and truly loved. The wedding my parents had tried to ignore indeed became the event of the century. But more importantly, it had become the beginning of a story I never could have written for myself. One where a teacher from Denver got to change the world, one student at a time. And that, more than all the Bentleys, designer dresses, and crystal chandeliers in the world, was the greatest fortune of all. So, tell me, if you were in my shoes, after discovering all of this, how would you have handled that first conversation with your parents at the reception? What would you have said? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments.